It was nearly midnight when the last customer slammed the door on their way out of Old Town Calf, the fluorescent "Open 24 Hours" sign buzzing weakly behind them like a tired heartbeat. Maya Williams wiped her hands on her apron, not because they were dirty, but because her nerves had started to show in her fingers again. The kind of restlessness that came after 16 hours on her feet, after hearing the word "sweetheart" tossed at her by strangers who couldn't be bothered to remember her name. She was 19, once a pre-law student at Emory University, now a waitress who could quote the Constitution better than the men who left her crumpled bills and half-finished coffee cups. That night had started like any other: greasy air, lukewarm fries, a college kid crying quietly in the corner booth. But then they walked in. Two men in $1,000 suits with phones glued to their ears and stress written into their postures. One of them looked up and asked for black coffee, no sugar, and the other, taller, darker, with tired eyes and something hard behind his voice, pointed to the booth in the back. Maya served them quickly, like she always did, quiet and efficient. But as she turned to walk away, she heard it, a voice sharper than the coffee steam. "If you're so damn smart, then translate this." She hesitated, not because it involved her, but because something about the way it was said made her stomach clench. She turned slightly. The taller man had slid a document across the table. It was a contract, multiple pages, some in legalese, some in French. The other man stared at it like it had insulted his mother. "I don't do international clauses," the man muttered. "Then we're screwed," said the taller one, slamming a palm onto the table. "Because if we sign this, we just gave them full override access to the entire integration stack." Maya's breath caught. She didn't mean to speak. She really didn't. But something about the panic in his voice and the words "override access" made her lips move before her brain could stop them. "You mean Article 7, subsection C?" Both men turned. The silence that followed was dense enough to carve. "Excuse me?" the tall one said, narrowing his eyes. Maya swallowed. "If the clause is from the 2019 merger templates used in most Franco-American partnerships, then Article 7C usually involves override protocols for shared data pools. It's standard, unless redlined." She bit her tongue. She had gone too far, again. But the taller man didn't yell. He stood, slowly, walking toward her like a riddle in motion. "Who are you?" "Just the girl who brings coffee," she said quickly, stepping back. "Right. Because the girl who brings coffee just quoted cross-jurisdictional law in 2 languages. She tried to retreat, but he stepped into her path. "Say that again, about the override." She hesitated, then sighed. "If the clause is generic and not redlined, it usually means the party ceding access loses exclusive control of encrypted data sets after merger integration. In plain English, once you merge, they own everything, even the code you thought was proprietary." The silence was longer this time. Finally, the man nodded to the other, who pulled out his phone and scanned the contract again. "She's right," he said, voice small. "How the hell did I miss that?" "Because you didn't have someone who's lived on both sides of desperation," Maya muttered under her breath. The taller man turned back. "What's your name?" "Maya." "Maya what?" "Maya Williams." "You in school?" "Dropped out." "Why?" "My mom has stage 3 lupus and my scholarship didn't cover real life." The man blinked. For a second, the hardness in his expression cracked. Then he said, "I'm Darius Whitmore." She blinked. "As in Whitmore Tech?" "Yeah," he said. "As in the guy who's about to lose a multi-billion-dollar merger because his legal team can't read." She didn't laugh. He did. A short, bitter chuckle that made the lines around his eyes deepen. "What are you doing tomorrow at 10 p.m.? "Sleeping," she said. "I've got a double shift starting at 6. "Take it off." "To do what?" "Come talk to me again. Bring your brain. Leave the apron." "And if I say no, then you keep serving coffee to idiots who don't know what they're looking at. And if I say yes, you might change your life." She looked at him for a long time. "Only if you don't treat me like I'm lucky to be invited." "Deal." And with that, he left. No card, no number, just the kind of promise that lingers like the aftertaste of bitter coffee. The next morning, Maya called out of work for the first time in 2 years. Her manager cursed. Her mother asked if she was sick. Her little brother Marcus asked if she'd finally snapped. She told them nothing. Because how do you explain to people who've only ever known ceilings that someone just handed you a crack in the roof? At 10 p.m. sharp, she stood in front of a sleek building that looked like it had been carved from glass and money. A woman in a white suit greeted her with a clipped smile and a name badge that read Clarice. Maya followed her through a silent lobby, past framed patents and a wall-sized digital map of data flow. Upstairs, the conference room was empty, except for Darius. He stood with his back to the glass, the city behind him. "You came," he said. "You invited me," she replied. "Most people don't say yes. Most people didn't grow up needing to memorize food stamps and medical codes by age 10. He nodded. "Good point." He motioned for her to sit. "I want to show you something." On the screen behind him, a flowchart glowed. It was messy, sprawling, full of arrows and acronyms. "This is Lawbridge," he said. "Or it's supposed to be. It's a platform that lets people understand their rights in plain English. Real-time legal AI for low-income communities." She blinked. "You're building that?" "Trying," he said, "but it keeps falling apart. The code's clunky. The language is full of legalese. No one actually understands it." "Because you built it from the top down," she said. "Not the bottom up." He turned. "Explain." "You wrote it like a lawyer trying to talk to poor people. Instead, you need to write it like a poor person trying to survive the law." He stared at her, long and hard, then nodded. "Okay, rewrite it." "What?" "From the ground up, you, starting tomorrow. My team will help. I'm not qualified. You just saved me $10 million with a sentence. I don't care what your diploma says. You're qualified." She looked at the screen again, at the broken map of justice someone once believed in. And for the first time in years, she felt her heart beat with something other than survival. "Okay," she said softly, "but I want one thing." "What's that?" "My name, on the first line of credits, as the person who reimagined it." Darius grinned. "Fair, but you'll have to earn it." "I already did," she replied. "You just didn't notice until now." And with that, Maya Williams Dropout, Waitress, invisible genius, sat down at the table, not as a guest, but as the first brick in a revolution that would wear her name. The elevator doors closed behind her with a soft hiss, but the pressure building in Maya's chest didn't ease. Her fingers clutched the frayed strap of her canvas bag as she followed the assistant Clarice again down a hallway so pristine it felt like walking through a cloud of silence and glass. The floor beneath her feet didn't squeak or creak. It absorbed her steps like the building itself had been designed to erase any trace she existed. At the end of the corridor, 2 wide glass doors opened to reveal the open-concept floor of Whitmore Tech's Innovation Wing. Sunlight poured in from the south-facing windows, illuminating rows of workstations where people half her age typed code she used to dream about contributing to. They barely looked up as she walked in. Why would they? To them, she was just a visitor, someone probably here for a tour, or worse, a charity intern with no credentials and even less experience. But she kept walking, back straight, head high, until she reached the central table where Darius stood in front of an oversized digital whiteboard. He looked tired in a way money couldn't fix, like a man who had burned one too many candles and still hadn't found the fire he needed. "Maya," he said, offering a nod, "welcome to the brain." She looked around, unsure if she was supposed to speak. Then she realized everyone else was already watching her. 5 men, 2 women, and 1 older guy in a faded blazer who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "This is Raymond," Darius said, gesturing toward him. "He's our lead counsel and head of compliance." Raymond didn't smile. He barely nodded. "She doesn't have clearance," he said flatly. "She doesn't even have a resume." "She has results," Darius replied. "That's better." Raymond folded his arms. "You brought in a waitress to review enterprise-level legal architecture?" "No," Maya said before Darius could answer. "He brought in someone who understands how broken systems punish the people you never see." There was a pause, a long one. Then someone at the table, Janine, a coder in oversized glasses, whispered, "I like her." That got a chuckle. Darius smiled. "Maya's helping us rewrite Lawbridge from the ground up. She'll be working with all of you." Raymond scowled. "She's not even background checked." "Already done," Clarice called from the door. "No flags, except she's had a library fine open since 2017. A few people laughed. Not Raymond. He stepped forward and dropped a thick binder on the table. "This is the current schema. Let's see what your waitress makes of it." Maya sat down, quietly. She opened the binder and began flipping. They all watched her like a circus act. But what none of them expected, what no one ever expected, was that she didn't just understand it. She tore through it. "This flow logic is reversed," she muttered on page 3. "You're asking users to click through 6 steps before they even input the issue. People in crisis don't follow forms, they follow panic." Page 7. "Why is the language coded at grade 12 level? People reading this app aren't lawyers. Some barely finish school. Simplify. Remove passive voice." Page 11. "You're treating eviction law like it's uniform. But tenant rights vary wildly by county. You need localized AI that can adapt in real time, or this entire segment is misleading." By page 22, no one was speaking. They just watched her, even Raymond. When she closed the binder, her hands were steady. Her voice was calm. "This isn't a bad system," she said. "It's just not built for the people who need it most." Darius nodded. "So what do we do?" "Start over," she said, "with empathy first, code second." And that's what they did. For 3 weeks, Maya worked 10-hour days beside people with degrees from Stanford and Yale, rewriting modules, translating law into language someone's grandmother could understand. She sat in on focus groups with domestic abuse survivors, listened to a man explain how he'd been evicted for $47 in unpaid rent, read court letters from people who didn't know what defendant meant. Every night she went home exhausted. Not from the work, but from how much she cared. One morning, she arrived to find her badge deactivated. The security guard looked apologetic, but firm. "I was told you're not on the internal list," he said. "That's impossible," she said. "I've been working here for weeks." "I can't let you up without clearance." Maya called Darius. No answer. She waited. 10 minutes, 20. Finally, Clarice came downstairs, face tight. "There was a vote," she said. "Raymond raised concerns about liability, said your position's unofficial. He's calling for full HR review." Maya clenched her fists. "So I'm being erased because I don't have a piece of paper?" "No," Clarice said quietly. "You're being erased because you made them uncomfortable." Maya turned and left. That afternoon, she walked to the small park by the MARTA station and sat on the bench she used to cry on after dropping out. Her brother Marcus called. "You okay?" he asked. She didn't lie. "No." "You want me to find Raymond and slash his tires?" "Tempting," she laughed. "But no." The next day, something changed. Darius called a press meeting. No warning, no delay. He stood in front of every major Atlanta outlet and said, "We're rebuilding Lawbridge from the ground up, and the mind behind it isn't a lawyer. She's a girl who once taught herself contract law between late-night shifts and doctor visits. Her name is Maya Williams, and she sees what we don't." The backlash was immediate. Some called it a PR stunt, others called it dangerous, but others quietly, then louder, called it brilliant. That same week, Darius reinstated Maya with full pay and official title, Director of Legal Innovation. Raymond protested, loudly. Maya didn't respond with words. She responded with a prototype, one that could explain Miranda rights in 6 languages, on a 4th grade reading level in under 2 minutes. And when they tested it with a real user, an undocumented woman terrified of calling the police after an assault, she cried. Not because the app worked, but because someone finally made it for her. The building didn't feel so cold after that. The windows still reflected money. But Maya could finally see herself in the glass. The rain had just begun when Maya stepped out of the subway station, her hoodie soaked almost instantly. She didn't run. She let the drops sink into her shoulders, her skin, her thoughts. It had been 3 months since Darius made her Director of Legal Innovation, and the weight of that title followed her like a shadow stitched to her spine. At 19, she wasn't supposed to be leading anything, let alone the country's most ambitious legal tech reform. And yet, every time she tried to breathe, it felt like someone was watching her from behind tinted boardroom glass, waiting for her to fail. That evening, she wasn't heading home. She walked 3 blocks past the normal bus stop, then up 2 flights of stairs into a cramped co-working space where young activists and tech-savvy community organizers were hacking their way through the world's indifference. No suits, no HR, just old laptops, shared pizza, and purpose. Maya sat down in a corner booth, opened her Chromebook, and began dissecting the latest clause from Lawbridge's new municipal housing section. It was supposed to be airtight. Legal had cleared it. The board had approved it. But something about the wording felt off, like a thread pulled tight in a sleeve until the seam split. 1 word. She stared at it for a long time. Temporary. That was it. In a section designed to protect tenants from sudden evictions, the use of the word temporary changed everything. It allowed landlords to redefine any housing assistance as short-term aid. It opened a loophole wide enough to drive an entire family out of their home. Maya's stomach turned. She triple-checked the original legislative language, the footnotes, the cross-references. Then she ran simulations in the sandbox model. Tenant requests help. Landlord accepts under new clause. Tenant defaults by 1 day. Landlord terminates lease with no legal recourse. She sat back, sick to her core. 2 Someone had written this in intentionally. It wasn't a mistake, it was a trap. She didn't sleep that night. At 7:12 a.m., she sent an internal memo to Darius, flagged urgent, outlining the issue in precise language with 3 alternatives. No reply. At 8:34, she followed up. Nothing. At 9:17, her badge access pinged as restricted when she entered the secure server room. She didn't panic. Not yet. She called Clarice. "Can you check if my system permissions changed overnight?" Clarice hesitated. "Let me guess, Section 8 housing clause?" "Yes." "I'm not supposed to say anything, but Raymond had a closed-door meeting with some of the board last night. Something about investor pushback on activist language." Maya's heart sank. She hung up, walked straight to Darius's office. He was there, standing at the window, face unreadable. "You saw the clause," she said. "Yes." "And?" "It's politics, Maya. It's manipulation," she snapped. "You think they won't notice? You think poor people don't read fine print? That's exactly how we got here." Darius turned slowly. His face was tired, older than usual. "Do you think I don't know that? You think I don't remember what it was like to grow up in East Point without running water for days? But I can't protect the whole world at once. We have to make compromises." "That's not compromise," Maya said. "That's complicity." He looked at her, long and hard. "You're angry." "I'm alive," she said. "There's a difference." She turned to leave. He didn't stop her. That afternoon, she went underground. Not literally, but close. She met with eviction defense attorneys, undocumented tenants, elderly women living alone on fixed income. She showed them the clause. She watched their eyes widen. She listened as they explained how that single word could unravel trust, undo progress. That night, Maya returned to her apartment and didn't eat. She coded. For hours. Until her screen blurred. She built a patch, one that flagged any landlord usage of the temporary aid clause and cross-checked it with localized tenant rights databases. If landlords tried to exploit it, the app would auto-generate a warning message and direct the tenant to legal assistance. She called it the fire escape. At 4:07 a.m., she uploaded it into the beta system. At 5:18, Raymond deactivated her admin credentials. At 7:00, Darius called. "What did you do?" "I did what the law wouldn't," she said. "I gave people a back door when you locked the front." "Do you understand what this means? We could lose funding." "Then let them leave," Maya said. "If investors can't handle justice, they don't belong in our rooms." "It doesn't work like that," Darius whispered. "Then change how it works." There was a long pause. Then he said something she didn't expect. "Meet me at the courthouse, 10 o'clock. "Why?" "Because you're going to testify." "About what?" "About why Lawbridge matters." Maya sat in the gallery, hands shaking, sweat prickling her spine. The city council had called an emergency hearing about tenant protection software and whether Lawbridge was skirting liability. Raymond sat at the table in a sleek suit. He spoke first, polished, cold, legal. Then it was Maya's turn. She stepped up, no notes, just heart. "When I was 15, she began, "my mom was evicted because she didn't understand the notice taped to our door. We slept in our car for 4 nights before she begged a cousin to take us in. She had lupus. She needed a refrigerator for her meds. We had none. I read that letter 1,000 times after that. I memorized every line. That's why I'm here." She lifted her chin. "Lawbridge isn't just an app. It's a translation of a system that was never meant for people like us. So if this council wants to gut it, fine. But know this, you're not just cutting code. You're cutting lifelines." Silence. Then one councilwoman whispered, "Thank you, Ms. Williams," and they voted to keep the patch by a single vote. Raymond resigned 2 days later. Maya was offered his job. She declined. "I don't want to wear the suit that failed people," she said. Instead, she created the Public Rights Division, an internal watchdog unit staffed by people who had lived the laws, not just written them. The fire escape patch became permanent. Downloads tripled. Lawbridge expanded into 6 states, and Maya finally slept. Not because the work was done, but because it was working. She went back to that park bench one Sunday morning, the same one where she once cried alone. This time, a woman sat beside her, thin, tired, eyes wide with gratitude. "You're her," the woman said. "My son used your app. Stopped an illegal lockout. He's only 17, but he fought because you taught him how." Maya smiled. Not big, not proud, just full. She reached into her bag, pulled out a granola bar, and handed it to the woman. "Pass it on," she said. Justice spreads better when it's shared. The auditorium lights dimmed just enough to soften the nerves, but Maya's hands were still shaken slightly as she stood behind the heavy podium. A large screen behind her projected the words "Future of Equity in Law" in minimalist blue, and beneath it, her name, Maya Williams, Director of Public Rights Division, Law Bridge Initiative. She hadn't wanted this spotlight. Not at first. She had only wanted her mother to get the medication on time, for Marcus to sleep in a room that locked properly, for people to stop choosing between rent and insulin. But here she was, 20 years old, standing before senators, federal officials, nonprofit heads, and a sea of students who whispered her name like it was something impossible that somehow became real. She tapped the mic. It clicked softly. She cleared her throat. Then she told them a story, not about code or funding or policy, but about the day she first saw her mother cry into a court letter she couldn't understand, and how that moment turned her from a kid into a translator of fear. She didn't use slides. She didn't quote legal texts. She said the word hope 10 times, not because it was strategic, but because it was true. After her speech, they gave her a standing ovation. But the real change happened quietly. In the days that followed, the Department of Housing and Urban Development reached out. Then the Justice Department. Then a coalition of community law firms who wanted integration. By the end of the month, Lawbridge had secured federal funding to scale nationally, with Maya overseeing the design of its ethics and accessibility standards. For the first time, she had the power not just to repair systems, but to reinvent them. But success came with shadows. At a board meeting 2 weeks later, a venture capitalist, slick-haired, manicured, and smiling too hard, leaned forward and said, "You're a remarkable face for this, Maya. Young, dynamic, authentic. You should consider letting someone else handle the strategy so you can focus on being our ambassador." The room stilled. Maya set down her water glass. "If by ambassador you mean mascot," she said, "I'll pass." "That's not what I meant," he said quickly. "Sure it is," she replied, voice calm. "You want the story of me without the voice of me. But they're not separate." The board fell quiet. Darius didn't speak, but when Maya looked at him, he gave the slightest nod, approval, respect. So she stayed at the table, and she kept speaking. When Texas tried to block the app's launch over concerns about unsupervised legal education, Maya flew down and testified in person. When a viral post accused Lawbridge of training the poor to sue the rich, Maya wrote a 900-word response that ended with, "We don't train people to sue. We show them they've always had the right to stand." The reply was shared over 1 million times. But not everything was loud. Sometimes the victories whispered, like when an elderly man in Ohio used the app to stop a foreclosure, or when a high school girl in Nevada uploaded a TikTok about how it helped her protect her younger brother from being unlawfully detained. Maya saved every message, printed them, pinned them to a board in her tiny home office under a sign that read, "Proof." Her mother, now in remission, sat in that room sometimes and just smiled. "You make people feel seen," she told Maya. "That's rare." "I just speak their language," Maya replied, "because no one ever spoke mine until I forced them to listen." One afternoon, Marcus ran into the apartment with a backpack full of flyers. "You're on the cover of Teen Legal," he shouted, breathless. "That's not a real magazine," she laughed. "Still, they called you the Law Whisperer. That's kind of badass." She grinned. For a moment, it felt like being a kid again. Before the court letters, before the darkness, and in that moment she realized something she hadn't dared to believe until now. She wasn't surviving anymore. She was leading. That fall, she returned to Emory not as a student, but as a guest lecturer. Her class was full, standing room only, students with notepads and questions and hope in their eyes. One girl asked, "How do we make change when we're still learning?" Maya paused, then said, "You start by listening to people who were never allowed in the room, and then you let their stories rewrite the blueprint." On her last slide, instead of a logo or a quote, she just wrote, "Law should not be a language only the privileged can read." When class ended, a student waited until the others left, then approached her with trembling hands. I used your app," they whispered. "I came out to my parents, got kicked out, but your youth housing module got me into a shelter. I just wanted to say thank you." Maya smiled, tears pricking her eyes. "Don't thank me," she said. "Just promise you'll build something too." And they nodded. Outside the lecture hall, the sun was setting. Golden light poured through the windows like a blessing. Darius waited by the curb. "You coming?" he asked. "We're late for the gala." "I think I'm exactly where I need to be," Maya said, looking back once more. At the school, the students, the hallway where she once dropped out and walked away. Now she was walking back in, not as a dropout, not even as a prodigy, but as a woman who had taken her pain, forged it into purpose, and handed it to the world like a torch. That evening, at the gala, when her name was announced as Innovator of the Year, she stood on the stage in a simple black dress, no diamonds, no ego, just her voice, and she said, "They told me I couldn't change the system without a degree. I told them they were right. I didn't change it. I rewrote it. For everyone else who's still knocking on the doors we weren't supposed to find." Applause thundered. But even louder than the claps was the silence in her own heart, the kind that comes not from emptiness, but from peace. Later that night, back in her apartment, Maya stood by the window, watching the city lights shimmer like promises. Her phone buzzed. A text from a new contact, a young girl in New Jersey. Just 3 words. It helped me. Maya turned off the lamp, smiled into the dark, and whispered, "Then it's working." Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it speaks soft, sometimes it wears hoodies, sometimes it waits tables, but it always finds a way, especially when someone like Maya Williams refuses to stop building the bridge.